Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for MDM's webcast, 7 Key Investments Distributors Should Make to Grow Online Revenue. Our 60-minute program today is sponsored by Codifyd. My name's Tom Gale, publisher of Modern Distribution Management Newsletter and website mdm.com. I have the pleasure of moderating today's program. Before we begin, a few brief housekeeping notes. If you'd like to access the handouts for today's program, please go to mdm.com/slides and download them now. Or email us at info@mdm.com and we'll send them to you as a PDF attachment. Our program is being recorded today, and we'll be sending a follow-up link to this recording to share with your colleagues or listen to it again. I do encourage questions. In the interest of time, we won't be taking them by phone, but please use the chat function in the bottom left of the screen to ask a question at any time, or if you're experiencing any technical issues. Simply type your question into the chat window at the bottom left and hit the Enter key. Finally, you can make the slides larger and view our presentation today in full screen mode by clicking the button in the top right of your screen that says Full Screen. You can return to normal size by hitting the Escape key. So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker. Michael Nagrant is a principal consultant for Codifyd with over a decade of experience developing product content, search, merchandising, and data solutions for some of the leading distributors in the country. And when he's not doing that and generating e-commerce revenue growth, he writes a weekly column as the chief dining contributor for Chicago Tribune's Red Eye newspaper. Everyone's on the call today here is well aware of the saying, the devil is in the details. And when it comes to building effective e-commerce sites, it really translates into the dollars are in the details. So it really is the foundational work that makes for a frictionless user experience that makes it very easy for customers to buy. So with that, let's get started. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, thanks so much, Tom. So today I'm very happy to be here, and thank you guys for taking time out of your busy day. We really appreciate it. What we're going to start out with here are a few trends, some from Acuity Group and some from our own internal measures of the work that we're doing with our customers. Basically look at what's driving why you need to make these investments. Then we'll go through the 7 investments that we see from experience here at Codifyd that are very important to growing your online revenue. And then, of course, everybody always wants to know about return on investment. So what we're going to do is go through a few client case studies to show you what the payoff is for making these types of investments. So first we'll go over to the trends. According to the Acuity Group's 2013 State of Procurement, what we know, basically simply put, is that B2B is not, especially B2B distribution, is not keeping up with the B2C online buying experience. We know that customers of yours are acclimated and socialized by places like Amazon or say Target.com in the retail world, but because they're socialized that way by all of the good content that they're getting, by the kind of investments we're going to illustrate today, they're starting to expect that in the B2B world. And so what we're seeing is that, what we often hear in the distribution space is I'm holding off on making an investment because, our customer still buys from inside sales, or our customer really doesn't expect to go through e-commerce. They need some service or hand-holding. That being said, when Acuity talked to the B2B customer and they talked to purchasing and procurement agents in the corporate world, what they found is that 57% of buyers are participating online now. 50% of them have a budget of 500 or a million or more, and a lot of those people, 90% or so, are spending that budget online. 30% of those buyers expect to increase the budget they spend online beyond that. And what we also know is that 71% of those buyers said that they would buy more products online if it was easier and more convenient to browse and purchase products from a distributor's website. We believe that distributors must focus on product content to increase conversion rates and customer retention. This week and the last couple of weeks, everybody's worrying about Ebola. What you in the distribution world should be worrying about is keeping up with the B2C experience to grow your online revenues. So this is our experience based on working with our clients. What we know is that there's sort of a spectrum of distribution companies right now out there. And we start out sort of at the far left here. There are a lot of folks today who only have a static website, who only list their line cards and their PDF catalogs. We know that those people are doing only a few percentage points in online revenue. We know that folks who've gone a little bit farther than that have started to port out their ERP data. They allow exact part number searches or history of your ordering for the customer so that they can do reorders. Those people start to earn about 3 to 5% of online revenue. Folks who've gone a little bit beyond that have started to do product categorization, but maybe not according to best practice. Those who put data out there that's not normalized or harmonized. Those who put product content out there, images and copy, but not a consistent effort or a whole effort in terms of providing all images a customer might need. We see those people starting to get up into the 10 or 15% range. And then what we know today that anywhere from 25 to 60% of online revenue can be earned for your company if you start to invest in the kind of things that we're going to talk about today. Whether it's optimized product categorization, normalized product characteristics or attribution, especially to drive faceted search, focus on your search tuning and focus on generating SEO optimized landing pages, creating rich content, original images, charts, and specifications, and also establishing a central source of truth or a PIM-MDM system in your organization. That's where we see the big sort of bang for your buck in terms of growing online revenue. I've actually talked to a couple of folks who were 100-year-old catalog distribution companies in the last few weeks who were doing 60 and 70% respectively online after making similar investments in the last 5 to 10 years. So this is not something that, if you're just starting out or you're resisting, to do this, it's a good idea to start moving because folks like you are seeing huge growth in online revenue. We know also that online revenue is a relatively cheaper transaction for your organization relative to inside sales. That's not to say that those things shouldn't go hand in hand, but there's a great opportunity for you to earn higher margins in your business and more revenue as you move online. So what are the investments? The first one we're going to talk about is product categorization. Basically, you may also hear in the marketplace the term taxonomy. Taxonomy or product categorization is basically the practice and science of classification. We're all familiar with what taxonomy is in our day-to-day based on the experience of our lives, whether it's if you were in science class in junior high and you started talking about things like kingdom, phylum, genus, species, obviously in a business, catalog indexes, sales reporting categories, how you drive your e-commerce today, that kind of categorization is also taxonomy or product categorization. And then, of course, we've all taken things out from a library. The way that a library is organized, the Dewey Decimal System, that also is a product categorization or a taxonomy system. Ultimately, the reason we start with taxonomy is that what we believe is that clear product categories make it easier for customers to find products fast. And if they can find it, they can buy it, and that's the name of the game. Ultimately, being able to find stuff drives, or product findability drives revenue. What you should do when you're creating product categorization is organize your products into distinct groups, which allows your customers to quickly navigate to the things they need. Create landing pages, a place when a person searches for a particular rich keyword, you can send them directly to a grouping of those products instead of just a product result set. Also, taxonomy, the way that you name or the product category names that you use are really important for driving search engine optimization. Very simply put, as a simple example, we all know that if you sell trash cans, there's 4 or 5 different ways you could describe them. You could call them refuse bins, circular files, waste receptacles. We know that if you look at the way that customers search internally on your site search, as well as through major search engines like Google and Bing, that what 95% of people search for is trash cans. So when you create a product categorization, try to use the customer language. Don't get cute. Call it a trash can. And when you do, you're going to attract more natural search traffic. And then ultimately, creating a product categorization structure or a taxonomy allows you to create product attribute filters so that customers can start to do things like choose according to size, material, or shape across a large group of products. This is just an example of something we see all the time in this marketplace. People tend to take their catalog indexes or indexes of products and just kind of dump them online and put all their products into that index and display that to customers. This actually existed in the marketplace a few years ago for a client of ours. There were 77 overwhelming choices for a selection of valves. After we went through our best practices, what we did is we created 14 categories out of those 77. All 77 of those are accounted for here. Obviously, this is much more navigable, much more easy to browse. And what we actually found is that customer findability went up pretty significantly. In some cases, at launch, customers were able to find things in half the time. There was a direct success to finding products of roughly 30%. The other thing that's really big is making sure you organize your products into distinct groups. We call this a best practice of focusing on establishing mutual exclusivity in your product categorization. What's most important is that when you organize your products, organize them according to one principle, whether it's product type, characteristic, or an application. Don't mix those principles. When you start to mix those principles, customers start to think that products might exist in 2 or more places, and that's where you create confusion and they abandon their search. So this is an example actually in the marketplace for shoes. What we find here is that this is the top-level product categorization for all the shoes that this company sells. What we find is it's a mix of things like rating, product characteristics, like is it a slip-on or is it a lace-tie shoe? Product type, is it a boot? Is it a sneaker? Brand, they have a marketing term like 1850 collection. And then price, styles under $100. The problem with this, of course, is if I'm a customer looking for a slip-on boot that's under $100, where do I look? Do I look in slip-on? Do I look in boots? Do I look in under $100? Also, something like 1850 collection might be meaningful to the company who's created the marketing term, but I'm not really sure what that means as a customer in many cases. You know, is this pre-Civil War shoes? I'm not really sure. You want to be clear and distinct, and you want to make sure that you don't create this kind of overlapping confusion of multiple concepts. This is a very simple version of an alternative to that, but it's very clear that these categories for shoes are organized only by one principle. And ultimately, instead of all of those different things that we saw before, it's basically just shoe type. We get rid of things like brand, material, marketing terms, and color. It's consistent and easy to understand. If I'm looking for a slipper, it's very clear where I'm going to go for a slipper. If I'm looking for a boot, it's very clear where I'm going to look for a boot. There's one and only one home for the product. Once you've established a good product categorization structure or taxonomy, the next thing you need to do is start to think about how do I describe my products. Basically, where product categorization ends, what we call a schema or a data model or a plan for how you build and describe your products exists. That starts at when taxonomy ends. So product characteristics are also often known in organizations as attributes and values. Very simply, if I have a screwdriver, the attribute might be drive style, and the value could be Phillips. It could obviously be slotted. If it's a toolbox, the attribute might be number of drawers, and it has 5 drawers or 4 drawers or 3 drawers. Ultimately, the important point here is that you need to create rules for attributes and values to make them consistent, complete, and easy to understand. From a business organization standpoint, you're bringing in new products, you're getting rid of old products, you're trying to figure out ways to describe the same group of products and merchandise them online. There are a lot of different things you do with your product data. You have to have a consistent plan for similar products so that when customers approach them, they look the same or they're easy to compare online so customers can figure out what they want to buy. This is just another example of a client of ours that in the marketplace when we first engaged them, they didn't really have a plan for their products that was consistent. And so what we saw here were 2 different part numbers for dental floss. And one of them had flavor and type characteristics, mint and waxed, and almost the exact same product had no information whatsoever because there was no requirement that every single piece of dental floss had to have a flavor or a type. Ultimately, what that means is that if a customer were looking at the 2 products, they couldn't meaningfully compare them and decide which one to buy. This is obviously a very simplistic example, but we see this across hundreds, if not thousands, of products that are very similar. if I'm looking for a specific attribute and 5 of the products have it and 25 don't, there are going to be missed sales revenue opportunities on those 25 that don't have the product information. Here's another example we saw from a customer recently in the marketplace. These are circuits, and a customer's looking for a 15 amp circuit. What we saw is that, again, there was no consistent plan for how this product information was entered into their system. And so what you have is 2 different values that are exactly the same, 15 ampere capitalized, 15 ampere lowercase. These are both the exact same ones. So if a customer keys in on one of them, they're going to miss the other products that are the exact same because of a formatting error. Again, inconsistency when not having a plan for your product characteristics means customers won't know where to look. It leads to frustration, and ultimately frustration leads to abandonment on your e-commerce site. Again, another example from the same supplier. It's not only about what customers engage, but what your product data people are putting into your systems, because without a plan, they can do whatever they want. So in this particular case, if you were looking for a 240 voltage rated circuit, you have 4 different choices, 3 of which look almost exactly the same. There are some conditional use characteristics for the frequency, whether it's 50 or 60 hertz or 60 hertz, some of it's spacing variance, etc. What you need to do is find a better way and a consistent plan so that these all look like one value, or that they all, for example, that one that has 240 VAC but no frequency characteristic, it probably does have a frequency characteristic, but there was no requirement that this value had to have that in its format, and so it got thrown out. And so again, you might be missing information that would confirm and give customers confidence in their purchasing decision. Ultimately, when you're creating that plan, what we know at a minimum is that your product characteristics have to require clear names. What conveys the most information to a customer in the language in which they speak? Is it OAL, which doesn't mean very much to some customers, or should you call the product characteristic overall length so that a customer can quickly scan and understand exactly what's being described? You want to be consistent. If you have 2 vendors and one describes their product as high-speed steel and the other one high HSS, you need to normalize those to one value. And most likely we go with high-speed steel because it's the most descriptive. And you also want to make sure that you're asking for completeness. We just saw in that last example, some of the voltage values were missing a frequency characteristic. You have to ultimately have a consistent organization where you give customers the information they need so that they can compare and contrast to make a smart and confident purchasing decision. So once you've level set your product categorization and once you've made a plan for gathering your product characteristics or your product data through attribution and values, now there's sort of the process of actually going out and getting that information. Ultimately, none of us work in a place where we're only getting information from one supplier. And each supplier has their own model for describing product characteristics. The more suppliers you have, the harder it is, obviously, to create consistency in your data set so that customers can make those meaningful comparisons. Your goal in gathering data is to make sure it came from only one supplier. Again, here's an example of an office space or a paper type supplier. We have 7 different products, and they're all white 20-pound bond stock, but they came from multiple suppliers. And what you see, of course, is that sometimes they use a number symbol to describe pounds. Sometimes they spell it out. Sometimes there's a space between the value, 20 and pound, and sometimes there's not. Sometimes the color is included, and sometimes it's not. What we know after examining this is that these were all 20-pound bond white stock. When you're gathering information from all those suppliers, it's incumbent upon you as a customer or you as a vendor to make sure that those things all look the same so the customer can find the right thing that they're looking for. We know that there's basically 2 choices today in the marketplace. One is established in order to gather product data. One is establishing a vendor portal for suppliers so that they can send you data. What we know is that even the big guys, the ones who have the most marketing power in the world or the most sales juice, let's say folks like Walmart or Home Depot who have established vendor portals, even though they have that kind of power and they're big and they represent a large part of the marketplace, they still have significant exceptions in being able to compel their vendors to comply with vendor portals. At the end of the day, as big as they are, there's hundreds or thousands of other distributors out there who can sell their stuff, and they're not bound by that one supplier as powerful as they are, or frankly, they're working with small manufacturers who just don't have the ability to provide the information you need. There will be some exception where you're going to have to go out and acquire the data yourself through a vendor relations process or some other active means of working with your suppliers. Usually what we find is that a combination of the two works quite well. We can talk about those kind of processes offline and how best to approach that. We have some methodology around that. But ultimately, making a concerted effort to go out and get this data is very important. You can't just let it come to you in a passive vendor relations product, because if you do, you're not going to have effective enough product content and data to describe the products in the way customers are demanding today. Once you've acquired that data, again, as we saw earlier in how you define your product characteristics, you have to harmonize and normalize those differences between suppliers. Ultimately, that normalization eliminates duplication that confuses customers. The thing, I come from a place called McMaster Car Supply. Spent 6 years there, taking the online experience from a PDF catalog page to a fully functional, faceted e-commerce experience. We went from $11 million in revenue to roughly $250 or $300 million in revenue in roughly 5 years. In that time, revenue grew to 30-40% of online, or online revenue was 30 to 40% of overall business. Today, I believe they do roughly 60% of their business online. They were a 100-year-old catalog company. And even though they were a 100-year-old catalog company who was a bricks and mortar distributor, what we knew is by making these investments, they saw a significant revenue gain online. And the other thing that was important is, even though they were a distributor, what they talked about was, we are really a premier publisher. What that means is, most of your competitors in the distribution world are pretty good at putting things in a warehouse, picking it, putting it in a box, shipping it on a truck, and getting it to the customer on time. There are certainly variations in efficiency and things like that, but today people are getting really good. Folks who didn't do that stuff in the past, like say Amazon, are investing almost $1 billion in distribution centers around the world. What your competitive advantage is, taking all the information from suppliers and creating a model that merchandises it to your customers in a unique way so that they easily understand it and feel confident in why they're buying. That's where your competitive advantage comes from. And level setting the data and level setting the product information you get so that customers aren't confused is really your competitive advantage. This is, again, an example that we saw from a recent customer that existed in the marketplace. You have circuit breakers from two different manufacturers, GE and Siemens. They both describe their products not completely differently, but significantly differently. So, for example, if we look at the description, POL is sometimes abbreviated as 2P by GE, 2POL by GE and 2P by Siemens. A is for amperage from Siemens, and amp from GE. Descriptions also don't provide context or readability. These don't really read like sentences. They look like lists of values. So what does 10K mean here in this description? That's a question that a customer is most likely to ask. The other thing we know is that the major search engines award significant higher ranking for things that have a readability like a sentence as opposed to just a list of disparate attributes. And finally, what we know, without normalizing these values to be consistent across suppliers, search fails or search is slower because the data set that you have is inconsistent and the results can't be read and produced in a consistent way. So this is just an example of something we might do in terms of creating a more readable, consistent structure. They're basically now, whether it comes from GE or whether it comes from Siemens, it reads with the exact same attributes in the same order with the same formatting. Now that 10K gives a little more context for 10 kiloamp interrupting rated circuit breaker. If you're an engineer in that marketplace, you might have a much better understanding of what that is versus 10K. And most importantly, this parallel structure established something that site search algorithms like Bing or Google can crawl more quickly and efficiently. It also lets your customers compare products side by side. And even your site search is able to produce very focused and smart results instead of these long data sets that confuse customers or have them abandon your e-commerce experience. So what I've laid out right now is a foundation: product categorization, creating a schema or a plan for your product characteristics, focusing on going out and getting that information to that and building it to that plan or normalizing it to that plan. Various folks that, I've looked at the distributors who are on this call today, and many of you are in various states. Many of you do one or two or three of these investments. Some of you do them all. Once you've established that foundation, that's where we start to get more sophisticated, where we start to think like B2C in terms of merchandising product through images and copy. What we often know is that many distributors are not working with things like CDs or DVDs or digital cameras, things that consumers are very familiar with. However, what we know is that you have probably cornered the market on somebody who's, say, a packaging expert or somebody who's an electronics power distribution expert. Engineers buy from you. But what we know is that incremental sales or sales growth comes from more novice or incidental customers. Purchasing agents, the guy on the shop floor who happens to have a purchasing card or a credit card and can buy $500 or $1,000 a month. Those are people you're not going to necessarily make an investment to send inside salespeople to because the cost of doing business is so high. However, if we look at the historical example of, say, Amazon, or there are even distributors out there like, say, McMaster Carr, where that long tail of that incidental customer is as big or bigger than that core big, say, multi-$100 million company or billion-dollar company that you do business with today. And that's where your sales growth is coming from online. And those folks aren't necessarily the engineer who understands the very difficult to understand concept. You have to speak in their language. What I would say to you is that often what I hear from distributors is, well, the stuff we sell is really difficult to understand, and the engineers will get it. Consumers are never going to get it. Or the designer who's just incidentally buying this with his credit card is never going to get it. The thing I say is consider the miracle of the megapixel, which is to say 10 years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, none of us on this call knew what a megapixel was, right? Or very few of us. Today, we all know that if we're going to buy a digital camera, even if it's a compact, handheld Canon, say, we know that if you have 10 megapixels, it's a function of how high quality of an image you can capture. We know that it translates to I can shoot a 3x5 image that's going to be crisp, and it's going to print really nice on my inkjet printer. That's because somebody took the time in the consumer marketplace to take a difficult to understand concept or a concept that people thought was difficult to understand and merchandise it in a way that was easy to understand. And you can do the same thing with industrial or distribution supplies. So here's an example we see. So in the MRO or industrial marketplace, what we find is that even though people have made some of the early investments I've talked about today, what we're left with basically is just a list of values for an abrasive material, say sandpaper, right? Aluminum oxide, ceramic, ceramic alumina, diamond, silicon carbide. Again, values an engineer would love, but a purchasing agent may not understand. What we see is that you have to go beyond that. And so one thing you could do is provide a list of materials, aluminum oxide, ceramic, and provide the feature benefit characteristics of that information so that a customer can say, oh, you know what, ceramic is for using on really exotic alloys, and I'm going to sand down some stainless steel, so that works for me. The problem being very simply put, a customer says, I'm really looking for the best sandpaper material to use on stainless steel. But what we find is that even providing that kind of feature benefit information at the point of decision making isn't effective enough. Today, this is an example of something we created for a supplier surrounding abrasives or sandpaper, where we provided basically good, better, best options. Gold is best here. There was a key at the bottom that we can't see here, but gold was best, silver was good, and blue was better. So if I come in and I'm that customer and I say, what's the best surface material of an abrasive to use for stainless steel, I can start to look and I can see that, I'm looking for a coative or non-woven abrasive, a surface material, and that's gold, and that's the right thing that I can choose. The other thing here is I can look on 10 or 15 different decision points very quickly and make a decision about what I'm looking for. So the important thing is it's not enough just to have original copying images. You have to start to have comparative specifications, comparative charts, You need to speak in the customer's language so that they can be confident about what they're buying. And you need to think about it on an application basis, not just on an objective attribute characteristic basis. This is a very simple example. On the left is something we see today, surprisingly not in the distribution marketplace, but actually in the retail marketplace from a very big home goods supplier. If I'm looking to replace my light bulb, it's one thing to replace a very common incandescent bulb, but today in houses we have things like spotlight floodlight bulbs. We have flame cone type bulbs. If I read this list, I may not understand what those things mean, like what is a quad tube or what is a decorative candle. Instead of providing a descriptive list, you need to start providing visual cues to the customer as it right here. What is on it right doesn't force the customer to interpret. They have this thing in their hand that they're trying to replace. They can match it up to what's on the screen, and they'll be confident about their purchasing decision. It's going to lead to greater conversion, greater revenue, and maybe even more importantly, hopefully not a return for misinformation, and which, as we know, to distributors is very costly to have to process a return and send out a replacement. So once you've become more sophisticated after level setting a foundation and focusing on merchandising, where do I hold all these things? Now that I've established gold product content, where do I put all of this information? I've basically spent this money and I've created a mutually exclusive and consistent product categorization structure. I have a well-defined data model or a product characteristic structure. I have built this data to clean, normalized, consistent, and filled data fields. And now I've even established a supporting system within my organization of workflows and governance to maintain that investment over time. I'm not going to be successful if I don't have it all in one place that the company can agree on. And today we know many distributors have 4 or 5 different legacy systems, green screens for their warehouse, financial reporting systems, channel partner information syndication. We also know that, of course, your website, your mobile presence in omnicommerce is another channel. If you do not have an agreed central source of truth, not only will your internal product people be confused or try to spend so much time reconciling information in multiple places, but your customers are going to say, wait, I'm seeing 3 or 4 different things here. Which one is correct? So again, establish an MDM or a MDM initiative or a product information management system that feeds all of these different downstream systems. You need to reconcile your legacy systems and hold your investment in one key place. Because what we know is that if you don't have gold content and you don't establish a central structure, what happens is if you have a channel partner like, say, Amazon, you start to send them poor product information. If you're sending your websites or your mobile experience poor product information, it's resulting in lost sales. From a downstream system perspective, business systems like financial reporting, if you're sending transactional information from multiple places and it can't be reconciled, the next time you go to negotiate with a manufacturer or a supplier on pricing, you may not be getting the best bang for your buck and showing the full picture of what you buy, or you may not understand your margin structure as well as you could. And then those are very critical things to your business in terms of your revenue. So you want to establish a central source of truth for all the investments that you've made so far. And the last thing we're going to talk about is a focus on site search. So a lot of the stuff we've talked about will serve a visual browser, will serve a left navigation faceted search. The reason we save keyword search for last is that the success of keyword search is predicated on having good product content and good product data. If it is not consistent, site search will fail because site search will just present that inconsistency effectively to your customers. If you have consistency behind the scenes, what it will do is give you very smart, focused results that are consistent. So this, I understand, is a pretty crazy graph, especially for those who aren't necessarily IT or process folks. The important thing to understand about this is that what we see today in the marketplace is that a significant number of companies and distributors only implement that last box on the right, an OR search. There's a whole group of things that we would recommend on the left side to create a better algorithm. for search. And so to simplify all of that stuff on the left-hand side, what is really going on there? Basically what we're advocating is that on that left-hand side, you do a little bit of what we would call an and search, which is you're funneling your customers into hand-holding situations as often as possible. What we see today is everybody sort of wants to crawl all pieces of product data they have, all structured information, landing page, node names, etc. And what they're returning to customers is 100 pages of product information. We know that from experience, customers will not go past 1.2, 1.3 product pages. They'll just abandon and give up hope. What you're really looking for is to give one page or a central place. And what you do for that is you start to make decisions about customer queries and direct them or handhold them. So if a customer makes a broad search like adhesives, you send them directly to that landing page that you have for adhesives if it's an exact keyword match. You don't go and look for every single adhesive you sell on your site that might come with a kit in a weird place on your product category structure, or as it comes just as an accessory to some item. Because most of the time, 99% of customers are if they search for adhesive, they are looking for that particular tube or that particular cartridge. They're not looking for some 1% off kit item. Also, if customers get very specific in their searches, jobber length drill bits, say, not just drill bits, by creating that product categorization structure that we talked about and also creating a plan for product attributes and values, now you can actually start to send them into those different attributes. So now you go beyond the landing page. Maybe you have a type in your drill bit section that's jobber length, and you choose that. And now you get the customer exactly to all the jobber length drill bits. Or if somebody does something like purple thread locker and you don't necessarily have a landing page for that, you might think about creating a system that can generate a landing page on the fly that can choose all thread lockers that have a purple color attribute. And then, of course, the very most specific one, which we think we see a lot of people doing today, is that at the very last, if somebody searches directly for a part number or a brand name, take them to a landing page for that brand name for all products you sell, or send them directly to the product detail page for that part number. Don't send them to a list of a bunch of different things if there is only one appropriate return for that item. So what do I mean by hand-holding? We're all very familiar with these DIY guys. Ultimately, if I'm a customer and I search for a dishwasher on Lowe's, I get 310 results returned to me, and they're returned over probably 10 or 11 pages. There's no hand-holding going on here. We're basically saying we just found everything in our product data that listed the word dishwasher. Home Depot actually does something much more effectively is they have a dishwasher landing page, a dishwasher product category in their structure. And what they've done is instead of taking customers of 300 disparate products, they have taken them to the top level of where all dishwashers reside. And now customers can start to key in on things like, hey, you know what, I want something with front controls, or I want a built-in dishwasher. And it's much more easy to visually browse and navigate than to go through this huge list of 300 products. Also, when we focus on tuning an algorithm, there are sort of like little detail things you can do. One of those is making sure that you focus on how punctuation is handled. This is an example we saw recently from a customer where if a customer searched for tin silver or tin dash silver, they got radically different results. In the first case with no punctuation, they got 204 results. In the second situation, which is really the exact same search except it has a hyphen in it, you get 6 results. But obviously these result sets should match. So one of the things you need to make sure is that you're throwing out punctuation or tokenizing it correctly in your search algorithm so that the results match. Another thing that we see all the time, it's one of the most simple things that you can do to improve your algorithm, is make sure that you're accounting for plural variance amongst words. So if somebody searches for mirror on this customer or this healthcare distributor, they get 341 results. If they search for mirrors plural, they get 279 results. Again, these result sets should match for customers. If there are truly 341 mirrors, the person who uses a plural search should get 341 mirrors. This is just a minor tuning you should do to the algorithm that could have huge payoff. The thing is, you cannot just rely on an algorithm. What we know is that you have to make exceptions. The distributors who've been most successful tune their algorithms, but they also create a regular ongoing site search program of tuning things manually. And one of the things you can focus on are spelling variants. So we saw here that when we looked at the internal search for the customer, we saw that 1,500 of their customers in a 3-month period had misspelled the word fluoride. And when they misspelled it, they only got 5 results returned. When they spelled it correctly, they got 638 results, which is the appropriate level of products that this healthcare distributor sold. Obviously, those 1,500 customers who misspelled are missing out at 633 product buying opportunities. These should match. Typically, the only way you're going to identify these kind of things is having somebody look at that data on, say, a biweekly or monthly basis and make an accounting for those spelling variants. It's not only spelling variants, but it's synonym variants. An algorithm isn't going to anticipate synonyms in the marketplace. Typically, you need to feed that to the algorithm or feed that to a thesaurus or database that your search engine crawls. So we know that whirlpools and jacuzzi are somewhat synonymous or interchangeable terms. Yes, one of these is probably a trademark term for a company. However, there's no reason that if customers don't think that way. They think, hey, I think a whirlpool is a jacuzzi. I think a jacuzzi is a whirlpool. And when you search for a whirlpool, you get 7,000 items returned to you. When you search for a jacuzzi on the same website, you get a little over 3,000. These, again, should match. The only way that you're going to identify that this is a problem or to make sure that these things match is to associate them by doing a regular program of tuning, manual tuning against your algorithm and establishing a thesaurus. So you've now made these 7 investments. You know, you feel pretty good about yourself, or you're listening to me and you're like, oh, you know what, I think I already knew this or I didn't know this, but what's the payoff? This stuff comes at a cost. Ultimately, I want to drive online revenue. I want to drive cost efficiencies in my business. So these are just a couple of examples of people we've worked with. Patterson Companies, a very large healthcare distribution company, a $6 billion distribution company in St. Paul, Minnesota. They were very early in their development. If a customer searched for products like, say, carbide burrs, which are basically, not to make everybody uncomfortable on the call, but when you go to your dentist's office and you get drilled for a cavity, that thing in your mouth is basically a carbide burr that's doing the drilling. There were literally tens of thousands of carbide burrs that they sold, and when a customer searched for it, they got 50 to 100 product page results with 10 different results on each page. Customers were not looking past that first page, so there were missed opportunities of sales because customers weren't looking at tens of thousands of products because there were no product characteristics around those items so customers could choose on those different facets, say in a left navigation. They didn't have structured landing pages that you could send customers directly to. They didn't have product merchandising. So if a dentist came in and was looking to buy something that was a cone-shaped burr, they literally had to go through the list and look for the keyword cone to find what they were looking for, instead of having one attribute for cone with an image for what the cone shape actually was. And when we went through and we did basically almost all the investments we talked about today, we saw that they had a 37% increase in revenue on the categories we worked on. We found that through some iterative testing that ultimately there was a 50% reduction in the time that customers took to find products online prior to their legacy information. We found that there were duplicate categories removed so that the results were consistent and structured well so that customers knew exactly where to go. Ultimately, there was a lot less confusion about where to find products online. RS Components is a very big electronic components distributor in the UK. Again, a very large company. They sold 550,000 different items. They had roughly 1.6 million customers. Again, we made almost all the investments we've talked about today from the ground up with these guys. And what we found is that, one, they had a huge organization with multiple touch points. By creating an efficient product categorization, by creating an efficient plan for capturing data for new items and their legacy items, they were able to reduce their costs by 25% their data ownership and maintenance costs. The other thing, too, is we know that those improvements in customer experience resulted in increased online revenue. We're not at liberty to share the exact revenue numbers, but what we know is multi-millions, and over now today we've had a 4-year, 5-year relationship with these guys that continues and is ongoing. And also, one of the things that was really important to them is by centralizing the processes, reducing the number of people involved, their data security was improved, and the number of employees who actually handled data, which was in a legacy about 150, went down to 3. And then finally, one of the groups that we work with quite a bit are MRO, maintenance, repair, industrial supplies, people who sell things like power tools, plumbing fittings, electrical components, safety, and janitorial. We've had great success in this marketplace. And one of the distributor that I'm describing here, again, we started out significantly, 5 years ago. We've gone through the cycle of almost all the investments we've talked about today with them. We are an ongoing partner for new product induction with these guys. And what we have seen is that they have seen multi-million-dollar incremental sales revenue on the work that we have done. We've reduced the time that they originally went to market with new products, because now when they go out, they're not reinventing the wheel every time. They have a consistent plan for what product characteristics to get and what order and where to classify them. They understand what product content they need. And basically, they had gone from about a 20-week cycle of introducing new products down to 8 weeks. That 12 weeks obviously is a lot of increased sales opportunity and a lot more revenue that they can capture in a very short period of time. We know that growing products at a fast clip is one of the best ways to increase revenue as a company. And we've seen that the investments that we've outlined today can help you do that and help you do it in a reduced time and capture more market share. So just to recap, the 7 investments that we believe you need to focus on as a distributor for growing online revenue: focus on product categorization, setting up a good classification structure that is mutually exclusive and distinct so that a customer knows that one product has one home. They don't think to look in 2 or 3 places, which creates confusion. Make sure that you define product characteristics that are consistent and a format that's consistent for similar products. Go out and get that information. Do it actively as well as part of a vendor portal process. Once you've gotten that information, build it according to the plan that you've made for product characteristics. Make sure it's consistent. If things come from 5 different distributors who describe that product differently, your job is to be a premier publisher and harmonize or reconcile those 5 different ways into one so that the products are easy to compare and customers will be confident about their purchasing decisions. And then finally, once you've laid that foundation, then you can start to think about merchandising like retailers do. Have good, rich product images and copy that describe what this difficult to understand information is. Make it easier to understand to the more novice customer to capture more sales growth. And put it all in a single source of truth if you can, product information management system. And then start to tune your site search now that you've leveled your data structure in a consistent way. You're going to start to produce more focused, handheld results that bring a customer to exactly what they're looking for. And when you do that, ultimately you're going to get a significant return on investment based on the experience we've seen with the clients we've worked with, and also based on the trends that we've seen in the marketplace. And thank you very much. We'll open the floor to questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Michael. You really did a wonderful job of taking a pretty complex subject and really delving into it. I have to say that your example of a dental company seemed really appropriate when you talk about a subject like this, because for many companies, ours included, a lot of this work is very detailed. It can be excruciating in terms of dealing with the cleaning and getting the taxonomy right. So I just, when you gave that example, it kind of resonated for me. So we have some time for questions here, and we're 10 minutes before the hour. And as a reminder, you can ask a question by typing it in the chat window at the lower left corner of your webcast window and then hit return. I have a few questions here. Would like to start off. You've described a lot of investments, and there's a lot of moving parts here. Where should a company start, and can you give a little bit more in terms of time frame? I know you talked about working with a couple of customers through these different 7 levels of investment.
Yeah, the order in which I've presented the investments today sort of, in our experience, is probably the best workflow in terms of establishing how you start to make investment. So if you're pretty confident in your product categorization structure, you can already start to move on to establishing better product characteristic plans or an attribute and value plan. I would say that in the distribution marketplace, those two are not a given. Even if people have those things, they haven't accorded the best practices that we know as a company that have been tested in the marketplace to organizing their products. They often look like that shoe company that has a product category structure that is overlapping with marketing, pricing, branding, etc. And there's 4 or 5 different places in overlap where you can look for the same kind of product, and customers get confused. Things like, say, product categorization or taxonomy, or building product characteristic plans out like schema or data models. From a proof of concept standpoint, where you could take like a key category and level set maybe, let's say, 10,000 products, we know that we're able to do that in a very short time frame, maybe 2 to 3 months tops. Once we've established a working structure with the company, what we find is you're able to scale up teams and do categories simultaneously. Typically, what we've seen for distributors who sell 500,000 items, say, to 1 million items, we've been able to do all of their product categorization structure, do all of their product characteristic planning, build to that plan and normalize and go through all the quality assurance in less than a year in many cases. That's not an unreasonable timeline. Certainly, if you do it internally, I see companies being more deliberate. When I worked for McMaster Carr, which again sold roughly about 500 to 600,000 different products in different disparate categories, they did that over the course of 4 or 5 years, and were very deliberate about it. So the answer can probably be somewhere in between. But if you engage somebody who understands the best practices and doesn't have to reinvent the wheel, and I think the size of a lot of the distributors on here are at least tens of thousands of products, if not hundreds of thousands of products. It's not inconceivable to level set this kind of stuff in a year. That doesn't include, say, everything, right? So merchandising takes time, and again, our partnerships typically with companies that go through the whole cycle are multi-year at some point. But you may be more sophisticated already and do some of these things well, so you only have to focus in on 1 or 2 of them.
So speaking of that, and just a brief reminder, the slides will be available to everybody who's on the call today, and we'll be sending out also a link to the recording of today's call by the end of tomorrow as well to everybody. You talked a little bit about skill sets in terms of internally, and you've worked on both within a distributor, but now you've been a consultant. Is there some critical skill sets or qualities of a person who's going to be the champion internally on this?
I mean, consensus is important more than anything. Somebody who's a consensus builder, somebody who can cut across the organization. Typically, organizations struggle at doing all these things because today e-commerce is often a siloed process, right? Marketing may own the front end. IT may own the back end. Your merchandising department may own all of the product content in between. And that's one of the problems, is that they all have their separate budgets and they all have separate things that they focus on. But in order to really do a full implementation and do an effort that's an established broad vision, you're going to have to get those people all on the same page, sharing in the process. What we see in terms of failure points is that only one of those groups is driving it, say IT, but when IT is doing it, they don't have the product content expertise. And so while they've created a central source of truth and a really good workflow system, the information that goes into it is not high quality. Or if marketing is focused on things like SEO and a beautiful interface, they're not able to change the product information on the back end very easily, and they have to wait significant amounts of time to sort of get those things through. So, if you're looking for somebody at a higher level or somebody who can cut across the organization and build relationships to commit to this in a consensus way.
So what do you invest in first, technology or the content?
Content and the strategy around the content. One of the things that we see is IT is almost always out ahead here. And again, what happens is they may go and invest in a PIM system. The fact of the matter is each PIM system has its strengths. Some are better for content workflows. Some are better for print, if print is important to you, in addition to e-commerce or online. Some are better, and some have better data quality tools, et cetera. It's important for your organization first to understand what are the business drivers or the business rules around content. And because here's the thing, if you just take everything you have from your legacy systems and you don't level set it according to good practice, and you put it into a really good central source of technology, all that technology is going to do is serve up the problem you had before in a more effective way. So really you're going to actually have more exposure to confusion. But if you level set your content and you make it good before you put it into the technology, that's when you're going to have the best synergy in terms of success for your customers. Very simply, from a metaphorical perspective, if you think of your product content and your technology as a house, the foundation is, or what is, what's in the walls of a new house, right? Electricity, plumbing, etc. If you just put in a technology system, that's like putting up the drywall before putting in those that electricity or that plumbing. So when the product content folks get involved after the fact and they say, no, it has to be like this in order to work, you're effectively basically just ripping down the drywall to put that stuff in again. And we all know that that's going to be more costly to you when you're building a house than if you get it before you put the drywall in.
You gave some examples about around some large distributors. If there's a company on the call today, let's say they're $200 million a year in revenue, can they afford to make these investments that you've described here today?
Yeah, absolutely. We have had a lot of experience in the last couple years in what you might just call a mid-market. That number that you actually give me is actually a perfect indicator for a current client of mine who they're basically about 250 million in revenue. They were very static line card PDF presentation. This is about a year and a half, 2 years ago. They made an investment across the entire spectrum of everything we're talking today, except for they're just about to start to work on tuning their search. But I will not minimize the investment that needed to be made as a percentage of their business. However, they made that investment, and they have seen significant payoff. They've seen roughly 10% growth in their e-commerce experience in the last year since we started doing this work. They feel that the investment they made, even though they, of course, were nervous about it as a mid-tier company, they are now very confident that payoff has been huge, and they sort of serve as a model that we've actually been able to replicate a couple times now internally here at Codifyd. So I would say to you, yeah, absolutely. We're not just talking to billion-dollar companies here. $100 million companies are in the game for sure.
So, and final question before we hit the top of the hour here is, let's go continue down the spectrum in terms of company size. And if you don't have a site, but you're using third-party sites like Amazon or other platforms, are there some specific tips, ideas that people can take away from the investments you've described here?
Yeah, absolutely. Amazon is a marketplace that works on the best product content wins. So it's eminently important for you to syndicate your data in a way that is more consistent, more thorough, and better merchandised than what your competitors are offering. So if you're selling screws as a small distributor or as a person who's just drop shipping from, say, a manufacturer against 2 other people, it's incumbent upon you to take the product information that they provide you and transform it into something that's easy to understand that creates facets or product characteristics that people are searching on. So if you can go and look at internal site search and even on, like, say, Google or Bing and see what customers are searching for, make sure those keywords are reflected in the data and your data is formatted. The people who do that are the ones who are going to win in search results on Amazon. Amazon awards people who invest in content. If you just throw stuff up there that the manufacturer has, everybody has that information, and you're going to show up as a lower ranking because you're not standing out.
Michael, thank you. Let's wrap with that question. We've reached the top of the hour, and I'd like to thank you again, and I'd like to thank Codifyd for making this presentation possible today. You can learn more about Codifyd at www.codifyd.com. As I mentioned, we'll send a link to access a recording of this program. Feel free to share it with your colleagues. And we'll also have a DVD of this program available later, available for purchase at MDM as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, and this concludes our program.